As I drove home that evening, memories of that rainy day flooded back. The day of Brian's funeral, when my mother-in-law Joyce publicly blamed me for his death, her voice filled with venom and hatred. Even in our darkest hour, when my newborn Kylie and I were desperate for shelter and help, Joyce had slammed the door in our faces, leaving us alone in the cold rain. The pain of that rejection still stung after all these years, a wound that never fully healed. But fate has a way of turning the tables, I thought, remembering the beggar woman I'd seen at the bakery today. These bitter memories dissolved the moment I stepped through my front door, where my 19-year-old daughter Kylie greeted me with such overwhelming enthusiasm that it made my heart swell with joy. Her blue eyes, so much like her father's, sparkled as she exclaimed how much she had missed me and practically danced with delight over the cinnamon rolls I'd brought home, her absolute favorite since childhood. Despite my demanding career, I had always maintained an unbreakable bond with my precious daughter, though sometimes guilt gnawed at me for the long hours I spent away. That morning felt different, offering a rare moment of tranquility in my usually hectic life, yet it also stirred memories of a simpler time before my world became consumed by endless responsibilities. Kylie's presence was my sanctuary, my comfort in this relentless world of business meetings and deadlines. Though barely out of her teens, she had taken on all the household responsibilities with a maturity that both impressed and worried me. "Mom, you need to eat something," she said with that gentle authority she'd developed. "I'm making soup, and I'll brew your coffee too. I know you've got another busy day ahead." Her voice carried a composure beyond her years, reflecting the independent young woman she'd become during my frequent absences. I managed a weary smile and nodded, feeling both grateful and a little guilty. "Thank you, sweetheart. Don't forget to pick up Bonnie's bread." With the same nurturing smile she'd inherited from my late husband, Kylie replied to my small request as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Of course, Mom, don't worry about a thing. Bonnie mentioned she's heading to the market early today, just like someone else I know, always hunting for the best deals," she said with a knowing look that made me chuckle. Bonnie and I did share that particular trait, among many others that had forged our deep friendship. After a refreshing shower and a precious breakfast with my daughter, I changed into my business attire and bid Kylie goodbye. My day planner was packed solid, a testament to my role as a businesswoman in the competitive world of freight transport. Though my company was small, with just 6 trucks to our name, it represented years of blood, sweat, and tears to build something stable and successful from absolutely nothing. I'd had to construct every aspect of the business from the ground up, assembling a skilled logistics team, hiring experienced managers and professional drivers, and securing high-quality vehicles to ensure efficient service. There was no room for shortcuts or compromises in this industry, a lesson I'd learned the hard way. Despite planning to work just a few hours that day, a series of unexpected challenges arose, forcing me to stay much later than intended. On my way home, I stopped at my favorite cafe, a cozy haven where I often found solace in a cup of coffee and a slice of cake while sorting through my thoughts. As I sat there in my usual corner booth, my mind wandered to the elderly woman I'd encountered at the bakery earlier, the one wearing that distinctive pendant that seemed oddly familiar.
The golden sunlight pierced between the buildings, wrapping the street in a warm autumn glow as the city slowly awakened from its Sunday slumber. Not all hearts reflected this radiant morning light that signaled the beginning of a new week. In Aaron's bakery, the dawn silence was broken by the tinkling of the doorbell, announcing the first customer of the day. Erin stood behind the counter, her carefully made-up face barely concealing her boredom and dissatisfaction, as she gazed out at the street in front of her store. Though well-versed in her work, she found little joy in the daily routine that had become her life. The morning coffee in its plastic cup represented a small luxury in her monotonous existence. Checking yesterday's earnings, she sighed deeply, contemplating another day in what seemed like an endless cycle. At that moment, an elderly woman approached the store, wearing a worn dress and an old-fashioned coat that had seen better days. Her trembling hands clutching a few coins told a story of struggle and misfortune. With a quavering voice full of politeness, the woman greeted Aaron, her tone carrying both the embarrassment of having to ask for help and the dignity of someone who had faced adversity head-on. "Good morning, I wonder if you might spare some bread? I may not have enough money today, but I promise I'll pay tomorrow. I desperately need something to eat," she said, her eyes pleading for understanding. Aaron, who had harbored little sympathy for people in similar situations over the years, responded with a mixture of irritation and contempt in her voice. "As you can see, we don't have that kind of margin here. If you can't pay, I'm afraid I'll have to ask you to leave," she replied, showing no compassion in her tone. At that precise moment, Angela entered the store, presenting a stark contrast to the elderly woman, at least in Aaron's eyes. Everything about Angela, from her attire to her business conversation on her cell phone as she walked, exuded success and confidence. Aaron couldn't help but admire her, seeing in Angela everything she aspired to be. With a warm smile, Aaron rushed to serve Angela while making it painfully obvious to the elderly woman that her presence was no longer welcome. The elderly woman understood the message, nodding sadly as she slowly moved away from the counter. Aaron couldn't help feeling envious whenever she saw someone like Angela, knowing she would never live such a life herself. Still, Aaron's attention was drawn to the elderly woman who lingered in the bakery, particularly to the distinctive teardrop-shaped pendant she wore. It was a warm, genuine amber piece hanging from a uniquely designed chain rarely seen nowadays. Angela, absorbed in her phone conversation, barely noticed the pendant. When her call ended, Angela approached the counter and placed her usual order with Aaron: 1 French baguette, 3 cinnamon and vanilla rolls, and some cream-filled pastries, all to go as always. Aaron recalled Angela's preferences and quickly prepared the items. As Angela was leaving the store, she asked Aaron to use her change to sell some bread to the elderly woman. After Angela left, Aaron grudgingly wrapped up bread for the elderly woman, informing her it was a gift from the previous customer. The elderly woman showed profound gratitude, reminding Aaron that kind hearts still existed in the world. Though initially reluctant, Aaron couldn't help being moved by Angela's gesture of kindness.
As I sat in that quiet cafe, memories of this morning's incident at the bakery, along with a rainy night years ago, resurfaced as vividly as if it were yesterday. Through the curtain of rain, I stood there holding my newborn daughter Kylie, looking up at my mother-in-law Joyce's cold face in the window, her eyes filled with nothing but contempt for the uninvited arrival of her son's widow and grandchild. My voice trembled with desperation as I pleaded, "Please, Joyce, help us. I can't pay the rent anymore, we've been evicted from our apartment. We have nowhere else to go. I'm an orphan, I have no parents to turn to. And Kylie. She's your granddaughter. Just let us stay until I can find a place, please." I watched as Steve, my father-in-law, peered through the window, his face softening at the sight of his infant granddaughter in the cold rain, and I saw him move toward the door to let us in. But Joyce's shrill voice cut through the air like a knife. "You took our son from us, and now you want into our home? Brian died because of you. Figure it out yourself. How do we even know that child is really Brian's?" The door slammed shut with a finality that echoed through my heart. Still, I stood there in the rain, clinging to a desperate hope for mercy that never came. Finally, with my baby wailing against my chest, I turned away, knowing we were truly alone. I understood loneliness all too well. I'd grown up in an orphanage, a small, plain girl that no one ever wanted to adopt. The orphanage, though strictly run under the mayor's supervision, was managed by capable staff and dedicated teachers who truly cared about our education. They would often take us into town for exhibitions, circus shows, and movies, even enrolling us in amateur clubs for soccer, sewing, and foreign languages. From an early age, I showed a remarkable aptitude for mathematics and an exceptional memory that earned my teachers praise. After graduating high school, I managed to secure a place in the economics department of a prestigious university. The room I moved into when I started college was far from ideal. My neighbors were constantly drinking, smoking, and making noise, making it difficult to focus on my studies. Then one night, at a popular student hangout, I met Brian, the most captivating young man I'd ever seen. We couldn't take our eyes off each other all evening, lost in our own private world. He asked me to dance, and we spent hours talking, laughing, sharing stories of our lives. When some drunk guys started harassing me, Brian immediately stepped in, declaring boldly that I was his girlfriend. "Does anyone have a problem with that?" he challenged, his voice firm and protective. My heart swelled with gratitude and joy at his gallant defense and the way he'd claimed me as his girlfriend. From that night on, we were inseparable, meeting whenever we could. We fell deeply, irrevocably in love, the kind of love I'd only read about in books. Brian was studying economics at the same university, where he shone as the most brilliant student in our class, the pride of our college. Despite being a student, his ambition drove him to start his own small business repairing phones and computers, showing an entrepreneurial spirit that made him even more attractive to me. His family represented success in our small town. His father was the chief engineer at the local factory, while his mother maintained their spacious mansion in the heart of downtown. Brian was the kind of man who turned heads wherever he went, and I often caught other girls staring at him with undisguised longing in their eyes. Yet, his love for me was unwavering, and he never spared a second glance for the parade of beautiful women who tried to catch his attention. I became the target of envious whispers and cruel gossip among the other girls, who couldn't understand how an orphan like me, plain and unadorned, had captured the heart of someone like Brian. They criticized my lack of interest in fashion and makeup, my simple appearance, but their words meant nothing to me. To Brian, I was special. He would often say he was captivated by the depth of my blue eyes, the silky texture of my hair, and the way I whispered words of love meant only for him. I was different from the flashy, forward girls who pursued him so aggressively from the start. Before long, Brian asked me to move in with him in his rented apartment, preferring independence to living with his parents. When I curiously asked why he chose to pay rent when he had such a beautiful family home, he confessed that his mother's suffocating love and excessive worry had become unbearable. I gazed at him then, confessing my envy of having parents who loved so deeply, and lamenting my own solitude. Brian pulled me into his strong embrace, promising that I would never be alone again, vowing to be both my protector and my support. Our apartment became our sanctuary, always kept spotlessly clean, filled with the aroma of my cooking. Though I hadn't started out as a particularly good cook, my desire to make Brian happy drove me to perfect my culinary skills, creating new recipes just to see his face light up with joy. Our love grew steadily and honestly, nurturing each other's dreams and hopes. When Brian began seriously considering our future together, he quickly arranged for me to have dinner with his parents. During that first visit to Brian's family home, I approached his parents with utmost respect, but their response to me was chillingly cold, especially after learning about my background as an orphan. Joyce, Brian's mother, was particularly hostile, her displeasure evident in every gesture and word. She would often make degrading comments about my background and genetics, expressing her desire for grandchildren while implying I wouldn't be capable of producing healthy, intelligent offspring. Though Brian defended me fiercely, Joyce's words cut deep into my heart, bringing tears to my eyes even long after the conversations had ended. That's when I truly understood why Brian had been so reluctant to live at home. His mother's toxic jealousy and possessiveness were overwhelming. Joyce's attachment to her son bordered on the pathological, and it became clear she would stop at nothing to separate us. My only comfort during those dark days was Brian's unwavering defense of me against his mother. Time and again, he confronted Joyce, insisting that he would marry me regardless of their relationship or her approval. The conflict escalated when Brian's father challengingly asked how we planned to support ourselves in marriage, implying that Brian's scholarship wouldn't be enough. They accused me of manipulating their son for his money, cruelly stereotyping all orphans as cunning opportunists. Exhausted by the constant battles, Brian and I decided to distance ourselves from his parents, determined to fight for our future together. We made a pact to overcome every obstacle through our own strength and determination. Joyce's frequent phone calls disrupted our peace, demanding that her son end our relationship and return home. But Brian stood firm, making it crystal clear that this was his life and his mother had no right to control it. Together, Brian and I rented a small office and began building our business from scratch. In the midst of this turbulent time, we decided to have an intimate wedding ceremony, just the two of us. Though simple, our wedding day was magical. We barbecued in the backyard of our small rental house, splashed in the lake nearby, laughed under the warm sun, and sang around the campfire as Brian played his guitar. The night ended with kisses and promises that lasted until dawn, becoming our most precious and romantic memory. The first few years of marriage were financially challenging, forcing us to live modestly. Yet we never lost hope, working even harder to build our dreams. While working as an accountant, I harbored a secret dream of starting my own business, though lack of funds made it impossible at the time. As time passed, we achieved some stability, managing to buy a used car, and Brian started saving for an apartment. Then came what seemed like a golden opportunity. Brian was offered a promising position as head of sales at an industrial rare metals company. The position came with an attractive salary and significant potential for professional growth. Excited by this prospect, Brian decided to sell his small computer repair business and invest in shares of the new company, convinced of long-term profits. I couldn't share his enthusiasm and tried to persuade him to reconsider. But Brian, filled with passion and determination, convinced me we couldn't let this opportunity slip away. He trusted his instinct for profitable business ventures, which he'd been developing since college. Though I eventually gave in to Brian's enthusiasm and agreed to support his decision, I couldn't shake an unsettling feeling in my heart. It felt as though we were about to leap into an unknown abyss together. Soon after, a life-changing event occurred that would forever alter our path. I discovered I was pregnant. When Brian saw the ultrasound image at the hospital, his face lit up with pure joy, as if all his dreams had suddenly come true. This news transformed him, intensifying his desire to protect and provide for his growing family. He threw himself into his work with renewed vigor, staying late at the office, taking countless business trips, and sacrificing his precious sleep hours. All of this was driven by his determination to impress his superiors and advance his career for our sake. But I watched him with growing concern, my heart heavy with worry. I couldn't help but notice how he was taking on too much work, how his weight was dropping dramatically, and how dark circles had formed under his once bright eyes. I tried desperately to convince him to slow down and take care of his health, but Brian wouldn't listen. He was completely absorbed in his work and his own thoughts, as if possessed by some invisible force. No matter how much I expressed my concerns, he would brush them aside with vague reassurances, trying to ease my worried mind. In those moments, he would always change the subject to our baby's future, his eyes lighting up as he imagined pushing a stroller through the park and meeting our child for the first time. But fate, in its cruel wisdom, had prepared a devastating future for us. An unexpected tragedy was about to strike our family like a bolt from the blue. That fateful night, I was at home preparing dinner, waiting for my husband's return. As midnight approached with no sign of Brian, I called his phone in growing panic, only to find it either turned off or out of range. My anxiety mounted with each passing minute of silence. Driven by an inexplicable fear, I paced between the kitchen and the front door, stepping outside countless times to check for his arrival. This was completely unlike Brian. He had never failed to come home or at least contact me before. My mind raced with terrifying possibilities as hope for his safe return wrestled with my mounting dread. But as dawn broke, my worst fears became reality. My beloved Brian was gone forever. They found him in his car in the underground parking garage at his workplace. He had apparently turned on the engine to keep warm, succumbed to his exhaustion, and passed away from carbon monoxide poisoning. I couldn't accept this brutal reality. It seemed impossible, unreal. Just that morning, I had kissed him goodbye before work, and now I was facing the unthinkable truth of his death. Even when I saw his body at the morgue, my mind refused to acknowledge that this lifeless form was my Brian, my loving husband, my soulmate. At the funeral, while I struggled to accept my devastating loss, Brian's mother stormed in and publicly accused me of causing her son's death. She cruelly claimed that I had driven Brian to work himself into fatal exhaustion, her words cutting through me like sharpened daggers. In the depths of my grief, I had to endure not only the loss of my beloved husband, but also the vicious accusations and rejection from my mother-in-law. Blinded by grief, Joyce tried to physically attack me, only held back at the last moment by shocked funeral attendees. The stress of this confrontation triggered severe abdominal pains, and I was rushed to the emergency room, terrified for my unborn child. For 3 grueling weeks, I fought for both my life and my baby's, while Joyce showed no concern for either of us. Her complete indifference to her future grandchild's welfare added another layer of pain to my suffering, leaving me utterly alone in my grief. Days later, driven by an inexplicable urge, I began investigating the mysterious circumstances of Brian's death and discovered disturbing details. The driver's side door had been closed from the outside, and all fingerprints on the car keys had been wiped clean, even Brian's. A chilling thought began to form in my mind. What if Brian's death wasn't an accident at all, but murder? During my hospital stay, I had hoped the police investigation would progress, but I was met with devastating news. The case had been classified as an accident, and the investigation was closed without further inquiry. This premature conclusion left me not only with the emptiness of Brian's loss, but also the haunting pain of never knowing the true circumstances of his tragic end. After Brian's death, I repeatedly questioned the accuracy of the initial forensic examination and persistently demanded further investigation. The detectives treated me with condescension, dismissing my concerns and suggesting I focus on my own well-being and that of my future child instead of frequenting the police station. Without concrete evidence to support my suspicions, I was forced to accept the official explanation and face the harsh reality of moving forward alone. My sense of isolation and helplessness intensified when I realized I was now responsible not just for myself, but for my unborn child as well. Brian's savings barely covered the funeral expenses and the costs associated with our daughter's upcoming birth. After giving birth, I faced the heartbreaking reality of having no one to pick me up from the hospital. The situation worsened when I couldn't pay the apartment rent during my hospitalization, and with our funds nearly depleted, the landlord demanded we vacate. Though I managed to negotiate a brief period to pack our belongings, I desperately needed to find a new place to live. With limited options, I turned to my mother-in-law's house, clinging to a faint hope that Joyce might help for the sake of her grandchild. But Joyce not only rejected us both with cruel finality, but cursed us as well, her words filled with hatred and contempt. This act of hatred and disdain completely shattered what little strength I had left. With nowhere to go, holding my baby, and what little money we had, I felt utterly lost in the world. Finally, I found myself at the train station, walking along the platform in desperation, trying to soothe my crying daughter while searching for any sign of hope for our future. In my despair, I agonized over where we would spend the night and what fate awaited my baby daughter and me in this world that seemed to have turned its back on us. The weight of my suffering became so unbearable that thoughts of suicide flickered through my mind as a means of escape from this endless pain. As people rushed through the station, no one seemed to notice a grieving widow who had lost all hope in the world. Then suddenly, like an angel sent from heaven, a woman approached me with concern in her eyes, asking if I was all right and if I needed any help. Her unexpected kindness broke through my defenses, and I found myself unable to hold back my tears. Before I knew it, I was pouring out my tragic story to this stranger: my husband's death, our financial troubles, my newborn baby, and my mother-in-law's cruel rejection. The woman, who introduced herself as Bonnie, listened with careful attention and sympathy, urging me not to give up, especially for the sake of my innocent little daughter who deserved a future. Just when I was feeling most desperate about my situation, Bonnie made an unexpected proposition. She offered to rent me a room in her home at an affordable price, explaining that she wasn't looking to profit but rather use the rental income to support children at the local orphanage where she worked as a nurse on her modest pension. Bonnie's generosity was like a beacon of hope when I was at the lowest point in my life. Later, I visited Brian's grave, tears streaming down my face as I told him about the series of events that led me to find temporary shelter through the kindness of a stranger. Only the whistling wind answered my words, but Bonnie's help had given me both comfort and the strength to begin again. Though the pain and loneliness still haunted me, I began rebuilding my life piece by piece. As Kylie grew and started kindergarten, I secured a position as an accountant at a shipping company. Thanks to Bonnie's help in caring for Kylie, I was able to focus completely on my work. I made a firm resolution to become independent, raise my daughter alone, and provide her with the best education possible. My hard work quickly paid off, and within a few years, I was promoted to assistant director. When the director decided to relocate overseas, I was further promoted to head of the company. Using money I had saved and invested in the bank years before, I was able to purchase a majority stake in the company, becoming co-owner. The previous owner had complete faith in my dedication and business acumen. Not only did I keep the company running, but I expanded the business and realized the dream Brian and I had once shared of owning an apartment in the heart of the city. I also got my driver's license and bought my own car. Considering Bonnie as part of our family, we continued living together. Kylie, as intelligent as both her parents, worked tirelessly toward her dream of becoming a doctor after being accepted into medical school following her high school graduation. At 43, I remained unmarried. No one could ever take Brian's place in my heart. I kept his grave adorned with beautiful monuments and visited frequently, talking to him about everything, believing he watched over our daughter and me from heaven. I also took care of Bonnie, grateful for all the support she had given me during my darkest hours. As the years passed and Bonnie's health began to decline with age, I made sure she received all necessary medications and medical care. Meanwhile, my mother-in-law remained distant, showing no interest in her granddaughters or our well-being. I bitterly recalled Joyce's merciless treatment of my daughter and me in the past. That day, I realized the elderly beggar woman at Aaron's bakery was Joyce, and I couldn't help but contemplate the irony of fate. Years ago, she had despised me for being an orphan, and now she was begging for bread on the streets. To me, it seemed like fitting punishment for the cruelty she had shown to her son's family. Back home during dinner with my family, I couldn't help but share what had happened. I explained how I hadn't recognized her at first, thinking she was just another homeless woman, until I noticed the familiar pendant she always wore. I confessed that despite seeing Joyce's obvious poverty, I felt no sympathy, remembering her complete lack of mercy toward me. Kylie carefully inquired about her grandmother, wanting to know if she looked like her and how she might meet her. Despite all the pain we had endured, Kylie showed genuine interest in this woman who was part of our family history, expressing a clear desire to understand her life. I felt an indescribable anger rising within me. Kylie, why would you want to meet her? She treated us horribly. I have no intention of looking for her, I said firmly. Kylie responded with frustration in her voice, but Mom, that's not right. Weren't you the one who taught me about compassion and mercy? You don't have to be friends with Grandma, but she might need our help. I fell silent, pondering my daughter's words. Bonnie, who had been quiet until then, gently intervened. I understand you better than anyone, and I think you're right. But Angela, I have a story to tell you. I had a daughter named Hannah, whom I loved dearly. We were poor, though, and couldn't give her the luxurious life she wanted. At 16, she fell in with the wrong crowd, stopped studying, started running wild, and eventually began stealing money from home. Once she started, it became like an addiction she couldn't break. I tried to reason with her, but it was impossible. I was ashamed of having such a daughter. One day, we had our usual argument, and Hannah ran away. She got into an accident, and I never saw her alive again. I never imagined that argument would be our last conversation. How I regret not hugging her, not trying harder to understand her. I'm not the saint you think I am, Angela. Whether you talk to your mother-in-law is your decision. But everyone makes mistakes and needs forgiveness. Besides, Kylie has a right to know her grandmother. Bonnie's words kept me awake all night, lost in thought. The next morning, I went to the bakery, hoping to find Joyce, believing that a single shared glance might bridge our years of misunderstanding. After waiting for what seemed like hours with no sign of her, I decided to visit her old home. When I arrived, strangers greeted me with the news that the property had been sold long ago, and they had no information about the previous owner's whereabouts. I couldn't comprehend how Brian's once wealthy family, who had loved their home so dearly, had fallen so far. What tragic events had reduced my mother-in-law to begging on the streets? Every morning after that, I visited the bakery, hoping for a chance reunion with Joyce. Finally, I found her, and the transformation in her appearance struck me deeply. Her former beauty and arrogance had vanished, replaced by desperation and sorrow in her eyes. Despite my nervousness, I gathered my courage and approached her. "Hello, Joyce. Do you remember me?" Surprise flickered across her face, and after a moment's hesitation, she recognized me, expressing amazement at how much they had both changed and how glad she was to see me. Our conversation took an unexpected turn as Joyce confessed she had wanted to apologize for years, admitting that guilt had been eating away at her. Her genuine remorse and sincerity melted the resentment I had harbored in my heart. I found myself wondering where Joyce was living. She revealed she was living in modest circumstances, offering to share her story if I wanted to hear it, but understanding if I was still too bitter to listen. Moved by her humility, I invited her into my car, promising to stop for cake before visiting her current home. Arriving at the humble room she called home, I couldn't help but compare it to my own lodgings after leaving the orphanage, both marked by poverty, though I noticed her space was clean and well-maintained despite its simplicity. We sat together, beginning the delicate process of reconciliation, as I placed the tempting cake before her. Joyce couldn't resist her hunger and began eating, and in that moment, I felt deep compassion for her suffering. With a heavy sigh, Joyce began sharing her tragic tale of regret. "Steve and I lived a life of luxury, wanting for nothing. But Brian's death completely shattered me. I convinced myself you were responsible for his death. Unable to accept his sudden loss, my rejection of you sparked endless arguments with Steve, who tried to be rational. My bitterness poisoned our marriage and eventually made Steve seriously ill. His heart condition was diagnosed, and we had to sell our beloved home to cover his medical expenses, moving into this tiny room. For 5 years, we fought his illness, but in the end, I lost Steve too. He never forgave me for keeping our granddaughter away. I found myself completely alone, my pension barely covering basic necessities like medicine and food. That's when I finally faced the magnitude of my mistakes, pushing away my son, abandoning my granddaughter, my attitude even contributing to Steve's declining health. I feel like a monster. Brian appears in my dreams, looking at me with accusing eyes, asking, "Mother, how could you do this?" I'm ashamed of my actions and deeply regretful. But now, sharing this with you, I feel a small weight lifting from my shoulders. Joyce's confession revealed deep remorse not only for the pain she had caused others, but also for the suffering she had brought upon herself. I was stunned, feeling as if I was talking to a completely different person from the mother-in-law I had known. Her regret was unmistakably genuine and profound. When Joyce shyly asked about her granddaughter, showing interest in Kylie's name and current life, I was moved by her transformation and found myself opening up about my life with my daughter. I confessed that Brian still lived in my heart, which was why I had never remarried. I admitted that I now lived solely for my daughter, and ironically, if circumstances hadn't been so adverse and if Joyce hadn't rejected us, I might never have achieved such success in life. I told her about Bonnie, expressing my deep gratitude for the woman who had helped me during my darkest hours, and revealed how I had sworn to myself that my daughter would never experience such hardships and that all her dreams would come true. I also acknowledged that while I had once harbored intense hatred for Joyce, my daughter's wise desire to meet her grandmother had made me reconsider my attitude. I explained how I had come to accept Kylie's suggestion about visiting Joyce, reflecting on the importance of forgiveness and giving second chances. I realized that, after all, Joyce was family, and we needed to forgive and support each other rather than maintain our bitter resentment. In that moment, the two of us embraced, tears flowing freely. Joyce thanked me through her tears, expressing how my strength and compassion in forgiving her had lightened her soul and lifted a great burden from her shoulders. She invited me to visit her anytime, showing joy at the possibility of rebuilding our family bonds. Admitting her fear of facing loneliness, she expressed her desire to become part of the family again. I gently patted her shoulder and replied, "Of course." After this reunion, Joyce felt the guilt and anger that had consumed her for years beginning to fade, replaced by a sense of peace and harmony. The next day, after work, Kylie and I visited Joyce, bringing large shopping bags and cake. When Joyce saw her beloved granddaughter, she spread her arms wide in excitement and exclaimed, "Oh, my granddaughter. You look just like Brian. The same height, the same features. Let me hug you. I'm so sorry, Kylie. I made so many mistakes. Can you forgive your foolish grandmother?" Kylie wiped away her tears and answered softly, "Don't worry, Grandma. I don't hold any grudges against you, and you'll always be my grandmother. Do you have any photos of Dad? I'd love to see them. I never met him, but Mom talks about him often. She still loves him deeply." Joyce excitedly opened an old cabinet and pulled out a dust-covered photo album. She carefully opened it and began showing Kylie the photographs, her hands trembling with emotion. "Look, here's Brian when he was just 1 year old. Such a beautiful smile, isn't it? And this one is from his first day of school," she explained as Kylie looked on with a gentle smile. "Who's this?" Kylie asked, pointing to an unfamiliar face in one of the photos. "That's your grandfather, Steve. And this is from your parents' wedding day. We weren't invited, something I deeply regret now." Joyce's voice broke as she was overwhelmed by emotions, tears flowing as she remembered lost moments and the pain she had caused her son. Kylie comforted her grandmother tenderly. Don't be sad anymore, Grandma. Let's visit Dad's grave together. It would be wonderful to tell him that you and Mom have reconciled. And I want you to meet Grandma Bonnie too. She's like a second family to me, and I'm sure you two will get along well. Then she added, from now on, we can all be together. That's what matters most. Joyce couldn't help but marvel at her granddaughter. She was deeply moved by Kylie's wisdom and kindness. Kylie, I will be eternally grateful to your mother for raising you to be such a wonderful person. Having you in my life makes me feel like the luckiest person in the world. Let's go visit your father's grave together. I've regretted not asking for his forgiveness for so long, but I never had the courage, Joyce said softly. From that day forward, Kylie visited her grandmother almost daily, bringing sweets and small gifts to care for her. As a future doctor, Kylie encouraged her grandmother to get regular health checkups, ultimately helping with the treatment of Joyce's heart condition. Furthermore, Kylie seemed troubled by her grandmother's harsh living conditions. The apartment was noisy with inconsiderate neighbors, and the shared kitchen was far from clean. So Kylie approached me about having her grandmother move in with us in our apartment. I initially hesitated at this suggestion, as the unpleasant memories hadn't completely faded from my heart, and the thought of living under the same roof as my mother-in-law filled me with anxiety. However, after considering the difficult circumstances facing my elderly mother-in-law, I agreed to the arrangement. Once we started living together, my fears quickly dissolved like morning mist. Joyce and Bonnie became fast friends, finding common ground in cooking, knitting, and gardening. Gradually, I too began to enjoy warmer exchanges with Joyce, finding myself able to have honest conversations without fear of misunderstanding. Every evening, a delicious dinner awaited us, prepared with love by our two grandmothers who worked tirelessly to make our family life comfortable. They baked cakes and simmered soups with such care that our home became filled with warmth, friendship, and harmony. Joyce, Kylie, and I often visited Brian's grave together, where the elderly mother would clutch her son's photo, weeping with regret and begging for forgiveness. One day, Joyce told me about a dream she'd had of Brian. Unlike before, he hadn't accused her of anything but rather smiled at her with love, offering gratitude and peace. Upon waking, she told me she believed this dream was a sign that her son had forgiven her mistakes. This brought her inner peace and a deep pride in her relationship with me, her daughter-in-law, and her granddaughter, leading her to declare she would dedicate the rest of her life to us. Then one day, I had the idea to purchase a spacious, beautiful mansion where our whole family could live more comfortably. I also decided to keep our current apartment for Kylie's future use. After moving into the new home, their happiness grew even more profound. The house was so spacious and comfortable that we got a large dog, and Kylie brought home a playful cat. The family delighted in life with our new pets, while the grandmothers enjoyed tending to roses and maintaining a small vegetable garden. I turned the gazebo into my personal retreat, where I could relax after a long day's work. There, wrapped in a blanket, I would enjoy the silence and serenity, sending up prayers for my family's happiness. Though it took time, peace finally found its way into my heart, and I knew that Brian, watching from heaven, must be smiling at our united family. Life often turns those we love most into enemies, creating seemingly irreparable relationships. But in such times, it's crucial to take that first step forward, acknowledge our mistakes, forgive and seek forgiveness, and not be too hard on ourselves.
Fortunately, the people in this story found the strength to heal their wounds and rebuild their family bonds, proving that love and unity can overcome any adversity. So, what did you think of this story? Please let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. And check out this new story, you won't believe what happens next.